Welcome everyone to day 3 of EEI's 5th Annual Global Electrification Forum, or GEF. If you are just joining us today, my name is Vanessa Ferrero, and I'm a manager for international programs at EEI. I'll be your MC throughout the GEF. Today's sessions are all about the clean energy future and how companies around the world are preparing to achieve net zero carbon emissions. We're excited to be starting off day 2 with an opening keynote by Pulitzer Prize-winning author Daniel Yergin on disruptions shaping the new energy map, which will be preceded by remarks from National Grid CEO John Pettigrew. Now I'd like to welcome EEI Vice President for International Programs, Dr. Lawrence Jones, to the stage to share some brief remarks to kick off the day.
Thank you, Vanessa, for that kind introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Wherever you are, I'd like to briefly say that we're delighted to have opening remarks by Mr. John Pettigrew. John, as the CEO of National Grid, has led the company in tremendous ways as it relates to the new challenge of dealing with the energy transition and getting National Grid to support the net zero strategy of the United Kingdom. So without further ado, please welcome Mr. John Pettigrew.
Thank you, Lawrence, for those kind words. I'm very pleased to join you all today at the EEI's 5th Global Electrification Forum. I want to start by congratulating Tom, President of the EEI, for convening another impressive global event with heads of some of the world's leading electric companies, as well as leaders from finance, government, donor organizations, NGOs, and academia. This effort certainly demonstrates the role that the EEI plays as an important international organization advocating to advance the global power industry. I'm excited to hear from such a range of distinguished speakers across the 2 weeks. In particular, I'm really looking forward to the remarks by His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales during the special session on April the 22nd, which of course is Earth Day. The theme of this event is Destination 2050. Inflection, pathways, crossroads and convergence. The critical goal for 2050 for all of us here is achieving net zero in order to mitigate the worst impacts of climate change. I'm sure I can speak on behalf of the whole audience when I say we're immensely pleased to see the US re-enter the global conversation on climate change and regain a leadership role in the debate. It feels to me like we're all part of a growing momentum for change as we head into COP26, the most important gathering on this issue since Paris in 2015. Alok Sharma, COP26 President, I know, is hoping that governments of all shapes and sizes will come to Glasgow ready to agree new, bold and ambitious plans. And that's precisely why we at National Grid decided to become a principal partner for COP26. As one of the largest investor-owned energy companies in the world, with transmission and distribution networks in both the US and the UK, National Grid wants to play a vital role at the heart of a clean, fair and affordable energy future. Tackling climate change and reaching net zero is what drives our people and our business. So, for example, our engineers are working on solutions to unlock the opportunity that the North Sea provides for renewable energy, delivering on the UK government's ambition to have 40 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030. We're also exploring an ultra-rapid charging network to support the rollout of EVs in the UK, and in the US, we're piloting off-peak charging solutions for residential customers so they can recharge at the lowest possible cost, whilst also creating the least stress for the grid. For National Grid, COP26 is a key moment to drive more ambitious change towards that clean energy future. Now, one area of great importance, of course, is the rapid build-out of grid infrastructure to enable the integration of renewable generation. And so I'm really looking forward to the panel session that comes later today with the CEOs from Iberdrola, Enel, AES and Ørsted on enabling a clean energy future. That's a great example of why events like this are so important, offering the chance to hear from peers and colleagues about the work that they're doing, share challenges and solutions, and come together to make transformational change happen. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Daniel Yergin, a leading authority on energy, geopolitics, and the global economy, as well as a best-selling author and the winner of the Pulitzer Prize. He has an extraordinary grasp of the subject, and the New York Times describes him as America's most influential energy pundit. So Daniel, over to you.
Hello, everyone. Very glad to be with you today at this forum. I want to thank John Pettigrew for his very nice introduction, and certainly want to express appreciation to Tom Kuhn, the president of EEI, and EEI for the invitation to be a part of this important forum, and also my appreciation to Lawrence Jones, who's the vice president for international affairs for EEI, who has really been a great convener of this conference. I'm looking forward as well to the clean energy panel with 4 CEOs who are very much at the forefront of the global industry that will follow from my remarks. The name of this forum this year is Destination 2050, and it's a very good title because, first of all, it conveys a remarkable convergence around the goals for 2050. But secondly, I also have to say, personally, I really like the title. It's a great title because my new book is called The New Map, and it maps the route through a rapidly changing terrain to that destination 2050. And by the way, the challenges along the way. Fueling the drive to destination 2050, of course, is the climate agenda. But it's also been reinforced by what's happening in the economy, by an increasingly digital world economy that depends upon electricity, and also by the very sharp corner that the world automotive industry is now taking towards the electric car. The what, the aspirations for 2050 are very clear. The how, however, is not so clear. In fact, it's far from clear how to get there. But whatever the route, or maybe I should use plural, whatever the routes, we know that the electric power industry will be powering that journey. And we'll learn a lot from how that route looks right now from the 4 CEOs who'll be speaking shortly. But one thing we can be sure of is a world that depends so much more on electricity today will depend even more on electricity on that route to the year 2050. One way to interpret where we are and where we're headed is by thinking in terms of eras. I think there are 2 eras in the contemporary age of energy. One is before Paris, the Paris Climate 2015 conference, and one is after Paris. And it was quite remarkable to have 194 nations come together and agree on a single objective, which is keeping temperatures from rising 2 degrees and now 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. But what does that mean operationally? Well, that has led to net zero carbon as the goal, as a destination. And by the way, I want to emphasize that word net because you can't get there otherwise without it. But what has happened since 2050 is that objective of net zero carbon has become embedded in government policies, embedded in government spending, embedded in the decision-making by investors, the rise of ESG investing, and embedded in the strategies and objectives of companies all across the economic spectrum. But we're asking a lot of energy transition with this kind of flood of stimulus money going into economies. We'll probably be looking at an economy by the 3rd quarter of this year that's larger than it was in 2019. And it'll be an $88, $89 trillion global economy. That $88, $89 trillion global economy runs 80% on fossil fuels. And you can't get to zero carbon or net zero carbon without carbon capture being part of it. Now, I also want to emphasize that energy transitions are not new. In fact, I would argue, and this is what I argue in the new map, is that we're now in the 312th year of energy transition, going back to 1709, the month of January, when Abraham Darby, who was a metal worker in the English countryside, figured out that you could make iron more easily with coal rather than with wood. But the energy transitions take a long time to unfold. We think of the 19th century as the century of coal. It wasn't until the beginning of the 20th century that coal overtook wood to become the world's #1 energy resource. Oil, discovered in 1859 in Western Pennsylvania, doesn't overtake coal till the 1960s. And even then, energy traditions are also energy additions. I checked my numbers today, and today the world uses 3 times as much coal as it did in the 1960s when coal was being overtaken by oil. What might seem a little strange to all of you is that if I say this current energy transition that is at the heart of your strategies and how you're investing actually began in the 1970s during the oil crises of the 1970s. Wind, of course, went back many centuries. Solar, what began in the 1970s with solar, depended and arose from Albert Einstein's 1905 paper for which he received the Nobel Prize. So it took a long time to get there. I think the wind industry, at least as I've written and studied about it, really only took off. The real beginnings is when you have a marriage between California tax credits and Danish agricultural machinery industry. And that is what gave us the real beginnings of the wind industry that you all know today. But I think, as you all know, it took about 4 decades for wind and solar to get out of a niche and actually become highly competitive as those costs came down, as scale went up, and as you all know, very competitive today. What drives energy transitions? Well, it's technology, it's economics, it's public policy, it's the demand by the public, and it's the willpower and determination of researchers, of corporate leaders like you all on this conference today, and also entrepreneurs. I think in this case, we'd have to say that at least until the last 7 or 8 years, it's really been the weight of public policy that has been the main driver in terms of incentives, regulation, R&D spending. But now clearly the economics, the competitiveness have moved to the fore. We at IHS Markit estimate that $1.3 trillion will be invested from now until 2025 in non-hydro renewable power. Very big numbers around the world. It's striking to see the borders coming down among the different sectors of the energy business. Some of the world's largest oil and gas companies are now saying they're energy companies, or as one is saying, energies companies, plural. And that was a very powerful message that we heard from those companies at our CERAWeek conference that we held virtually last month. The importance of the decisions and choices made by you and others in the electric power industry become even more important as the world moves to a more digital situation. Imagine if this terrible pandemic, this plague, had happened a decade ago, and we didn't have Zoom. We couldn't have been as connected. Electricity made it possible. The world would not have functioned the degree it is. We probably wouldn't be able to be having this conference if it had been a decade ago. So that's a big change. The other, and I want to turn to that now, is how the automotive roadmap to the future is changing. And there too, borders are coming down, the borders that separated the electric power industry from transportation. In my book, The New Map, I offer a radical vision. Maybe it's increasingly a prediction, and I urge you all to look at it very carefully because of the impact it will have on your business. When Tesla appeared in 2008, it was a novelty with those roadsters. 13 years later, if I may use this phrase, it has been the spark plug for a radical transformation of the automobile industry towards the EVs, towards electric vehicles. Now, I want to hasten to tell you, this is not the first time that there's been a go at the electric vehicles. If you had been alive and on the streets of New York City in 1900, you would have seen more electric cars than gasoline-powered cars. And Thomas Edison was convinced that the electric car would win. But the electric car in that first battle was defeated by the Model T, Henry Ford mass production. In the late 1990s, GM, General Motors, came back with what they called the EV1. They spent $1 billion. They produced about 800 cars, and it was seen as a failure. But now we see the role of contingency, accidents in history. In 2003, and I really researched this and wanted to get this story right in the new map, an electric car, a young electric car enthusiast named J.B. Straubel managed to grab a lunch with Elon Musk in order to pitch an electric airplane. Musk said, not interested. J.B. said, well, what about an electric car? Okay, Musk said, would be interested. They ended up getting together. They hooked up with a small company called Tesla, and we know where that is today. It's funny to think about it. A couple of years ago, Elon Musk said, if they hadn't had that lunch, Tesla probably wouldn't exist today. Such is how history works. Now, you all know how fast things are changing. At IHS Markit, we have, in our automotive group, we have 300 researchers. We track very closely what's happening in the automobile industry. Currently, 45% of auto industry R&D is going into electric vehicles. We expect that number to go to 70%. But another number that will really show what's happening is General Motors is budgeting $27 billion between now and 2025 to produce 30 electric vehicle models by 2025. This is propelled by regulations, by bans. You know what California is doing, no gasoline cars after 2035, Britain maybe after 2030, China only new energy cars after 2035. And it's become the target of companies. Toyota now describes itself as a mobility company. Volkswagen goes even further and calls itself, Volkswagen, which makes all those cars, these are the two leading car makers, Toyota and Volkswagen. Volkswagen calls itself now a software-driven mobility company. Overall, government policy, of course, has been a great driver in pushing the electric car. And it's, of course, climate is central to it, but it's not only climate, it's also very much tied into this new era of great power competition, of strategic rivalry. China sees the electric car as a way to break into the global automobile market in a way it has not been able to do with internal combustion engines. But if you read the Joe Biden's infrastructure plan that just came out a couple of weeks ago, it says that one of the main reasons for spending $174 billion to promote electric cars is to win the EV market against China. Now, in the new map, and this is what I urge you to pay close attention to, I have this vision of how different things can be, and I call it auto tech. And this has a direct impact on your industry. It has three elements. One is the electric vehicle, talked about that. Secondly is the rapid rise of ride hailing, which will come back after the pandemic. And it's a very interesting shift. It means the driver's license is no longer a rite of passage for young people. It means the car becomes less an affirmation of identity and more a convenience, or if I may even say, a utility. The third element is the autonomous vehicle, self-driving. And I was talking with one of the leading researchers on it. He made a very interesting comment to share with you all. He said the first 90% was pretty easy. The next 9% was harder than the first 90%. And the last 1% is proving the hardest of all. So timing, not yet clear, although we know there are tests going on different roads of electric cars. But what might the future look like? In urban areas, we may see the business dominated by, call it the new mobility majors. These will be operators of large fleets of electric self-driving cars that will be hailed by people when they need a car. And the mobility majors that emerge will be the masters of integrating hardware and software. Now, at the beginning of the 20th century, that perennial optimist, Thomas Edison, the the patron of Edison Electric Institute, promised to an electric-powered tycoon that with his electric car, he would have many, many more new customers for the electric industry. He was a little early. It took about 120 years, but Edison's prediction, as you all know, is coming true. What will Destination 2050 look like? There are many questions. Let me put some of them on the table. What will be the role of natural gas? We're looking at that very carefully in our multi-client that we're doing called Sustainable Flame, because how does renewable natural gas balance with renewables? What's the role of hydrogen, which has momentum, particularly in Europe? Batteries and storage, and I know we'll hear about that from the panel of CEOs, and carbon capture, because there'll still probably be about 1 billion gasoline-powered cars on the road in 2050. And what about all the technologies we don't know? I just say, 2 years ago, how many of you had ever heard of Zoom? And another question is a kind of globalization and interconnected supply chains that we've known, is that going to last, or are we going to have a more fragmented global economy, a different kind of international system? Call it fragmented globalization. And something else that may seem far away from talking about what we're talking about today, but I think geopolitical risk is increasing with great power rivalry. It's not only strategic, it's not only military, but it will touch every corner of the world economy and will affect the supply chains for the net zero carbon economy, which people are not really thinking about today. So, at least as I spent the time looking at it in the new map, the road to 2050, we're on it. We're on the road to Destination 2050, but it will not be smooth. There will be challenges. There will be surprises. There will be twists and turns in this road. But we know that the electric power industry, with a product that is reliable, that is affordable, and that is clean, will not only be the foundation of the global economy in 2050, but it also will be at the forefront in providing the power for our journey that will get us to Destination 2050.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for sharing such thoughtful insights with us as we begin day 3, including a lot of questions we will face on the journey to 2050. If you'd like to think more about our energy future, we invite you to check out Daniel's recently released book, The New Map: Energy, Climate, and the Clash of Nations. You can find his book and those of other authors who are speaking at the Jeff by visiting our Destination 2050 bookstore in the Expo area.